After World War I wrapped up, Eugene Bullard decided to stick around in France. Why would he go back to the Jim Crow South when Paris had given him so much more respect, opportunity, and equality? He dove right back into boxing, fighting professionally across Europe and building a name for himself as a tough guy in the ring. But boxing was just the beginning. Paris in the 1920s was buzzing with music, art, and energy, and Eugene was right in the thick of it. By night, he became a drummer in the jazz scene, playing at the same clubs where legends like Josephine Baker and Louis Armstrong performed. Before long, he wasn't just playing music, he was running his own nightclub. Le Grand Duc became one of the hottest spots in Paris, attracting writers like Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald, as well as celebrities and military officers. What made him stand out wasn't just his success, it was how he made it in a world that recognized his talents rather than his skin color. In Paris, Eugene Bullard was more than a soldier. He was a star, a business owner, and a symbol of what life could be like outside racial prejudice. But while things were good, dark times were on the horizon. As the late 1930s approached, fascism was gaining ground. With Hitler's armies on the move, war was about to break out again, and Bullard, known as the Black Swallow of Death, wasn't about to just sit back. When France declared war on Germany in 1939, he picked up a rifle again, this time as part of the French infantry, and later in the resistance. 1940, he was seriously injured for the rest of his life. When the Nazis took over Paris, Bullard's story took another wild turn. The city where he had found freedom was now under German occupation. Inside his own nightclub, where German officers came to unwind, Bullard became a spy. He worked with French intelligence, listening and passing on secrets. Even wounded and under occupation, he kept up the fight. Paris had become a city of shadows, and Bullard, with connections in the nightclub scene and fluency in multiple languages, was the perfect man for espionage. By day, he entertained officers. By night, he sent their words into the hands of the resistance. But being a black man in Nazi-occupied France was incredibly risky. He stood out, and the Gestapo hunted spies without mercy. His double life could have ended at any moment with a single mistake. Still, Bullard didn't back down. He smuggled information, helped resistance fighters, and carried secret messages. The same fearlessness that had driven him to fight in trenches and take to the skies now fueled his resistance against an unstoppable enemy. By 1940, as the German occupation tightened, Bullard knew it was time to get his daughters out of danger. With help from his friends, he escaped France and sailed back to the US for the first time since running away as a boy. But while France hailed him as a hero, America wasn't ready to do the same. When Eugene Bullard came back to the US after World War II, it wasn't exactly the hero's welcome he'd gotten in France. No parades, no medals, and certainly no headlines. In Paris, he was celebrated as everything from a soldier to a musician to a spy who stood up to the Nazis. But in late 1940s and 1950s America, he was just another black man trying to get by. He set up shop in New York City, raising his daughters Jacqueline and Lolita, taking whatever jobs he could find. For a guy who once ran a trendy nightclub in Paris where Josephine Baker performed and Hemingway hung out, it was a rough adjustment. He ended up working as a longshoreman, an elevator operator, and even a security guard at Rockefeller Center. But Eugene came back with physical reminders of two wars. He had shrapnel still stuck in his back, and his face showed the scars from World War I. Yet none of them seemed to matter to America. They didn't see what he had been through. In 1954, the country he had once left to seek safety showed him its ugly side again. During a civil rights protest in Georgia, he was beaten by police, clubbed down right in front of everyone. The same guy who had fought Nazis and risked everything for democracy ended up bleeding on American soil at the hands of those meant to protect it. Still, he refused to let bitterness take over. He raised his daughters with pride and shared stories about the France that honored him, the friends he'd lost, and how dignity could be found even in tough times. People who knew him saw Eugene as someone who carried himself with a quiet strength. Though America largely ignored him, France never forgot. Bullard was decorated with the Croix de Guerre, the Médaille Militaire, and finally the Légion d'honneur, France's highest honor. In Paris, he wasn't seen as a black soldier or an outsider. He was seen as a hero. His nightclub years had made him a central figure in the Parisian jazz age. He was friends with Josephine Baker, who herself would become a resistance agent during World War II. They shared the same philosophy: fight oppression with courage, no matter the cost. Baker would later say that Bullard had a quiet strength. He carried his battles inside, never boasting of the medals he wore. Writers like Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald drank in his club. Louis Armstrong called him a friend. To them, Eugene wasn't just an entertainer. He was a symbol of resilience, of the possibilities that life in Paris offered Black Americans fleeing racism at home. But back in the United States, it was a different story. The man who had fought in 2 world wars, spied on Nazis, and been celebrated abroad was beaten by Georgia police in the 1950 civil rights protest. His French medals meant nothing on the streets of the Jim Crow South. And yet, even in his later years working odd jobs as an elevator operator at Rockefeller Center, he carried himself with dignity. Those who met him had no idea that the quiet man in uniform had once flown over Verdun and spied on the Nazis in occupied Paris. It wasn't until 1959, at the dedication of the French War Memorial in New York, that America finally allowed him his moment of honor. Wearing his French uniform, chest glittering with medals, Bullard raised the French flag. Cameras flashed, and for the first time, his adopted homeland's recognition was mirrored on American soil. Eugene Bullard died in 1961, buried in Flushing Cemetery in Queens, in the French War Veterans section. On his grave rest not American honors, but French ones. He lived by the words painted on his fighter plane: "All blood runs red." And that truth, that courage and sacrifice know no color, became the legacy of a man who fought for freedom in a world that too often denied him his own. Like and subscribe for more real stories from the lost and found.